Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to be doing my June wrap up. At the time that I'm filming this, I'm still in the middle of 2 books that I should finish by the end of the month, but I will just like squeeze them in at the end. The first book that I read this month was Half a Soul by Olivia Ashwater. This is the first book in the Regency fairy tale series. And so this particular book follows Dora, who when she was young she got half her soul stolen by a fairy, and this makes her act a bit odd, and then her cousin is looking for a husband, so they travel to London, and in London they meet the royal sorcerer basically, and he ends up saying that he will help Dora, and it is a bit of a romance between the two of them. I really enjoyed this. I read this in a feel-good reading vlog, and it definitely was feel good. It was sweet, it was cozy, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Definitely I prefer Small Miracles, but I did really enjoy this. I loved the little romance between the two of them. I thought it had some really sweet messaging, and I think the overall philosophy of it is like trying to make the world better with little deeds, one like step at a time. It's not a particularly plot-filled book or anything like that, but it made me laugh. And sometimes you just want that in a book, and that is definitely what this book is. And as I said, I had a really good time with it, and I give it a 4 out of 5 stars. So also included in that blog was In Deeper Waters by F.T. Lukens, and I read this as an audiobook. It follows a prince, and he has magic, and magic is kind of looked down upon in this world because his great-grandfather, I believe, also had magic, and he used it to basically become a tyrant. And he has basically been hidden his whole life once it was discovered that he had magic, and all of his siblings had got to go on a coming of age trip when they turned 16, and he is now 16 and his family is letting him do it. And it starts off and he is trying to rescue basically this boy who was trapped on the ship, and this strange boy immediately jumps over, and then the next day in the village he spots this boy alive and well, and then he gets kidnapped, and it can help him, whether it's himself, his family, or this strange boy. And it's very sweet. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I think again it was kind of like a right place right time kind of thing, because I did have quite a few issues. It was very insta-lovey. Yeah, the magic system and the world I just don't think was fully explained, and I think it left some things without discussion. And I think a lot of other times that kind of stuff might have bothered me, but it was kind of what I wanted right in that moment. The book never goes like too dark because he always has people there, and that's kind of what the book is about, is all of these people who love and support him and all of that. And I had a really good time with it. It's not a book that I'm going to remember looking back, you know, years from now, but I had a good time with it. Again, also included that in the vlog was The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This was a reread for me. I read it last year. It was my top book of 2022. I absolutely adore this. The audiobook is narrated by John Green, and so this is a non-fiction book. It is a collection of essays about humans as we know it, and about different aspects of our life, and it's all about him reviewing these different things. So again, I really love this book, and I find it so hard to talk about it because I just really love it, and it's so good. It's just really sweet, and it's a kind of book that makes you think. It's, I think, a good balance of like personal anecdotes and like his passions and all of this, as well as like some fun facts that you mightn't have already known. And as I said, this is a reread. I have spoken about it quite a bit because I love it. And so then the next book, again also included on vlog, was Our Not So Lonely Planet Travel Guide. It's a really long name, and I give this a 3 out of 5 stars. This is a manga, and it follows these 2 men as they are heading off to travel the world. One of them is very outgoing, but the other is quite reserved, and he's keeping a lot of things bottled up to himself, which we never actually really got to explore that because then that volume ended, and I'm sure it gets talked about in later volumes, but I'm not really going to continue. It was cute, it was sweet. I'm not really a visual person, I think. I keep trying and trying, but it just very rarely works for me. And I read this on SCRIBD, and I know that like when you're reading a manga it goes like from back to front, but because it was on SCRIBD obviously you just swiped, but I felt like some of the panels were out of order, because like sometimes they would like just like start in the middle of the page. I was like, is this a SCRIBD thing or is this thing? So I was like, am I just an idiot who can't read this, or is it like an actual issue? So yes, I gave it a 3 stars. It was cute, but I'm not gonna remember. I'm not gonna continue. It was okay. And we have the first book that I actually haven't read in a vlog, and that is And Then There Was None by Agatha Christie. So I landed on mystery / thriller on my spot, and I was like, I can't remember who suggested, but someone was like, Agatha Christie. And I was like, yeah, I should probably, like, if I'm gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna read a mystery or thriller, I should probably like read the Queen of Mystery, Agatha Christie. And so I listened to the audiobook of this. It was okay. I give it 3 stars. So this follows an island, and at these, is it 10 people are basically invited to this island through like different means. All of them go, and then one by one they all start getting killed off. It wasn't bad, but I just didn't really care about it that much. Like, it wasn't like keeping me interested and invested, and like it's a good thing that it was really short, because like if it was any longer I would have been so bored. It didn't really excite me. Like, I definitely see, like, you know, why it is what it is, like everyone knows, And Then There Was None. But I have only read a handful of mystery and thrillers, like literally a handful. So I am still very new to it and to what I enjoy. I think this kind of story might just not be the kind of one for me. Obviously, as someone who is mostly a fantasy reader, like the things that I love in that is world building, and I also like to love characters, or at least be intrigued by them. Like, I don't have to like them. But obviously with mysteries, there's no world building. You know, it's set in our world. And the characters in this book, they're not supposed to be likable. And like, that's fine with me. Like, I'm okay with unlikable characters, but I have to at least be like interested in them. And I just wasn't interested in them. I didn't find them very interesting. I didn't really care about their past and what they had done or hadn't done. And I just found myself like, I think if I had been more intrigued about them as people, maybe then I would have enjoyed this book more, but not for me. We're learning. So then the next book I finished is Night's Shadow by Sebastian Castell, and this is also included in a vlog. This is included in my revisiting my past book hauls. I was reading this while I read all of the previous books I just talked about. I have been reading this since like the end of May. And this is the second book in the Greatcoat series. So the first book is Traitor's Blade, and we follow a group of Greatcoats. King died a couple of years ago, and now they no longer really have a job, so they're doing small jobs here and there. And each of them were given a final task by the king, and we follow Falkio as he is like determined to complete his, but he doesn't actually understand what his is. And then they go to this town, and there's like this tournament happens, and he is trying to like protect this girl that he finds. And I give it 4 stars. I liked it. I didn't love it. I really thought I was going to love it. I talked about it in the vlog where I had it. Again, I will leave it linked down below. But like, I was disappointed, which is so silly, because like I gave it like a decent 4 stars, but like I expected it to be a 5 star. So then when it wasn't, I was like, oh, it's not a 5 star. A 4 star is a great rating. And like, I enjoyed it. I like the characters. I think that is like the main thing for me. I think this one was a little bit of, you know, trying to set up like and link kind of book 1 to book 3, because obviously we have book 1, as I just said, you know, they're trying to figure out what their jobs are that they're supposed to be doing, and then in this one we kind of like we're dealing with like the fallout of the first book, and we're kind of, as I described it, I felt like we were doing the side quests. And I hope in the next book that we're going to like get back on track. And okay, so this is the goal of the series, is to do this thing. And I hope that like in this 3rd book we're going to get back onto that, because if, as I said, it felt like we were doing a lot of different like side quests, like, oh, so we need to do this thing and this thing and this thing before we can go back and do this thing. Obviously I'm trying not to spoil it. To my next vlog, this was the one that I read for Pride. I read 3 different LGBTQ+ either sci-fis or fantasies. So the first book I read for that vlog was Ocean's Echo by Everina Maxwell, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. It's one of my higher 4 stars of the year. I really, really like this book. A couple of things that were holding me back from giving it the full vibe. So I enjoy this slightly more than the first book in the series, Winter's Orbit. They are companion novels though, they do not follow the same characters. So this is set on a different world from Winter's Orbit, which is very military orientated, and we follow Tanal, who is a reader, which means he can read people's minds, and then he kind of keeps getting himself in trouble and he ends up getting conscripted into the army so his mind can be bound and so then he can be controlled. And then we follow SCRIBD, who is the son of a disgraced general, and he is kind of basically blackmailed into binding his mind with Tanal, and the two of them are obviously working together, and then obviously it turns into a romance between the two of them. And I did actually really enjoy this. I think I prefer the romance in here and I prefer the characters in here slightly more than I did in book one, and I also think I prefer the politics in the world in this one slightly more, which is odd because usually I'm a big fan of like the royalty, court, kind of all of those kind of things, which is what happens in book one, whereas as I said, this one is more military orientated. But I think because the first book, it's like such a massive scale, I think I'm preferred kind of just focusing on this particular world, all of the inner workings of this one, as opposed to kind of like an empire. I did like the writing a bit more in book one because it was so clear from the very first second when you start out a chapter whose point of view you were in, because she did an incredible job of writing differently for them, for having two very distinct voices for them. And the one that we had for, I cannot remember his name, but basically not the prince, you can feel unease and anxiety throughout his writing and his point of view, which actually nearly gives you a pit in your stomach, and is like, I've never like really felt that way while reading a book, and like I was amazed that she was able to do that so well. And then like you'd switch to the other point of view and it'd be perfectly fine. And in this one I felt like they weren't as distinct. I still like her writing, it's just like I thought it was so impressive how she did that in the first book. Again, I'm in the same vlog as Ocean's Echo, it's Silver on the Nightfall by Rinch Pecco, and give this a 5 out of 5 stars. And I'm not going to talk about it too much because I'm terrible at talking about 5 stars. I really love this. Again, another one that it's definitely, I love it because of the characters. So this follows Remy, and he is a vampire hunter. His father is also a vampire hunter and a duke. And there's a lot of rumors about Remy. He might be half vampire and his father isn't his father, all of these things. And there are these strange vampire attacks happening. Vampires are like regenerating and they are like more monstrous than vampires usually are. And there is a kind of allyship that is formed between Remy and these two vampires. So these two vampires are an engaged couple and they have like interesting histories and past and interesting powers as well. And so they team up to try and come to the bottom of it. I love the characters. They are definitely what shine in this book. So I did enjoy it, like a lot of other things about it as well. I enjoyed the plot. It was a bit a slow start, but I enjoyed how it all came together. I enjoyed like the final battle, but also it still left things that I'm like really excited to explore in the future books, and also where the characters left off. It's like, will they, won't they? And again, really exciting. And I mentioned this in my video where I feel like I was really excited to read this because I've read a lot of Rinch Pecco books and they are very good at changing their writing style depending on what the story is that they are writing. And this is absolutely the case. This one was a lot slower and a lot, I think, a bit more descriptive. Politics a lot more complicated. I wouldn't say that this is like extremely adult references. There is like some bad language and there is like a bit of blood and gore. They're like usually about 3 like political factions, let's say, at play. Whereas in this one, again, like they step it up because it's like, okay, so we have like the humans versus the vampires, but inside the vampires there's like 9 different vampire courts, some that like each other, some that don't, some that like the humans, some that don't, and then we have the humans which are ruled by the queen, and some of the people don't like the queen, and like the dukes, some of them don't like each other, and all of this. And so there's a lot more than I think that they usually do, and so I think they did a really good job of like entering into the adult fantasy. And the main thing that I love about this book is the characters. I love the characters. I love their backstories, the way it's slowly revealed, and like you kind of like, again, you get that like underlying like unease when they're like kind of alluding to some things, and all of them have a lot of issues. It's slowly, the 3 of them like become closer and closer. It's so good, and especially like the dynamic between the 3 of them is so funny because Remy and oh my god, what's his name? I can't remember, but the male vampire, they get off on a really terrible start because they try to kill each other. And then she is just like so open, and she's like, to both of them, she's so open about everything, and she is like trying to be like the mediator, and just the way that this all develops, it's so good. It is so good, and I cannot wait. It's the second book. It's now until like April of 2024. How am I supposed to wait that long? I'm so excited. And book number 9 is going to be The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. Again, also included in that vlog, and I give this a 2 out of 5 stars. Just not for me. This follows 2 different sides of the world, the East and the West. The East worships dragons, work together, all of that, and then the West, they fear them. They see them as these evil creatures, and there is this nameless one, which is this creature from mythology that was killed like 1,000 years ago, and it might be rising, and these 2 sides might have to form an alliance in order to stop this from happening. I actually wrote an entire Goodreads review on this, but basically the bottom line is I was so bored. I was so bored. I didn't care about the characters, I didn't care about the world, I didn't care about the politics, I didn't care about the plot. I did not care. I was so uninterested, and I was so bored, and I just kept waiting for it to get better, and it just never did. The characters I just did not care about. The like sapphic relationship in here came out of nowhere, and I just did not understand why it was a thing, because they did not make sense as a couple. The only character that I like slightly cared for was because her point of view took up, I would say, at least 2/3 of this book, and when there's 4 point of views, like, I want them to be at least a bit evenly distributed, but that is absolutely not the case. She got so much, and like, of course I'm going to feel slightly more positive about her because I spent so much time with her, whereas like, how am I supposed to become attached to these other characters when I've barely spent any time with them? I just felt like they got no development whatsoever. Remember how I mentioned side quests in Night's Shadow? That was this entire book. So like, we start and we're learning about the nameless one, and then we do everything else, and then we go back to the nameless one. Like, so little of this book is actually about the nameless one and this creature that is rising. There is so much else going on, which usually I think I would be interested in, except none of it I think got the time and attention it deserved. She would like start a plot line, and then as soon as I would start to get invested in it, she would add something else in, which meant I had to like get reattached to this, or she would wrap it up with like very little satisfaction, and there are some things in here that she didn't even wrap up. The last book that I've read so far this month, but as I said, I'm in the middle of 2 that I should finish before the end of the month, is Daughter of No Worlds by Chris Broadbent, and I gave this a low 4 out of 5 stars. I kind of bounce back and forth between 3 and a 4, and I'm not sure will the vlog be up. I think the vlog that I read this in should be up before this. Okay, so it's a different month now. This is a continuation of my June wrap up, so it is now a June and July wrap up. Yeah. Anyway, so I never actually talked to you about the last 2 books that I read in June. So one of them was Iceland of Barbarians by Ruby Dixon. I give it a 2 out of 5 stars. I'm not really going to talk about this because I actually have a whole vlog. I have not edited it. I have it since June. But it will get done eventually, and you will one day see it, and then you can see my reactions to this. But honestly, it wasn't as weird as I thought it was going to be, which is kind of why I didn't like it as much. And the 12th book that I read in June was We Free the Stars by Hasfa Faisal, and this one, I have the book over there, but I'm too lazy to go get it. I'm so conflicted about this series because I've never felt the way I feel about this series as I do with this one. So I give it a 4 out of 5 stars. But what I mean is, to me, it feels nostalgic despite the fact I've never read it. And it feels nostalgic to the type of YA that like I used to love, and the characters are so well written, and there are so many like really well thought out things, but I just don't really connect to it anymore because I'm not the target audience. But I'm reading it and I have that sense of nostalgia as if I did love it 5 years ago, and I know for a fact that if I read it 5 years ago, I would have loved it. I would have been obsessed. Like, if I read it when I was the target age, I would be obsessed with this book. But there's just this weird disconnect that I cannot describe, but it just like, I like the characters, but just like, there's just something there that's not fully connecting. And same with the plot and the magic and all of this. Like, it's good. It's like objectively really well written and thought out, but there's just something that's not clicking, and it's so strange. And like, yeah, it's such a weird feeling. then on to July. So most of these I'm not actually going to talk about them for very long. So the first one was that I read in July was Red Sister by Mark Lawrence, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars, which was the same rating I gave it when I originally read it in 2020. So this is the series that we're reading for the Backlist Book Club, which is Cassidy's book club. I will leave a link to the live show down below because I feel like I talk a lot more about it in that. But also I feel like I came off a lot more negative in that, but it was just because I wanted to, I guess I kind of wanted to balance out everyone else's like really positive things. Well, me and Maria were both kind of like, I think both of us gave it a 3 stars. So like we did still like it, but we just didn't like really love it. Whereas like the others, like they really did love this book. And so I feel like we were trying to kind of be like counteract, but like, and like it's not as though I was lying. Like the things that I talked about I did have issues with, but like it was like an issue, but like I moved past it pretty quick. Like, you know, if you, I'm not sure, am I making sense? But you probably get me. So then the second book that I read was The Latchkey, and this is a short story that you get when you sign up for Olivia Atwell's website. I wanted to read this short story before I continued the series, and so I did, and I really liked it. I didn't give it a rating because it's like 30 pages, but it is just about Elias from the first book and his relationship with his father, as well as his relationship with the thought of being a father. And it was short. I enjoyed it. And then I read 10,000 Stitches, and this is very odd because I'm like, I don't really need to talk about this that much because I've spoken about it in the vlog, but I actually ended up deleting that vlog because I really hated how it was turning out. I really like this one. I think this is my favorite of the series. It's a high 4 stars, and this one, I don't necessarily think I liked the romance in it as much as I did with the first book. Like I really enjoyed like Elias and Dora's like banter back and forth and all of this, but I really enjoyed our 2 main characters of this one. So one of them is Effie. She is a maid and she is angry. She doesn't like the people that she's working for. They are rude and ignorant and they do not treat her as a person. And she is in love with a gentleman, which obviously she cannot be. And then she is crying about this when a fairy comes across her. And this man, Lord Blackthorn, he decides that he wants to help because he has become obsessed with the English and being virtuous. And so he decides that it would be very virtuous for him to help someone who is down on their luck to rise above their station. But the thing is, he's a fairy, and so he is not very good at it. And that is what made the book. He is such a funny character, and the interactions, again, I really enjoyed the interactions between the 2 of them, but not even necessarily in a romantic sense. Whereas with the other 2, like you could really like, you could sense that like romantic tension. With the 2 of them, like she is just like, oh my god, please don't make this worse, please don't make this worse. And he is like, I'm gonna help. And it's like, are you helping though? And the 2 of them are absolutely hilarious. And I really enjoyed this because basically in the afterwards of all her books, she talks about kind of like nearly the lesson behind it. So in like Half a Soul, she talked about like how sometimes all you can do is a small act of goodness and hope that that makes a small impact on the world and makes it a small bit better. And then in 10,000 Stitches, it was about the fact that we never really see fairy tales that are about the maids. Because even in Cinderella, because that's kind of like mainly what this is based on, you know, we see Cinderella and for a night she becomes a lady and the prince falls in love and all of that. But she was always technically a lady. Her father was a nobleman, and it was her stepmother that forced her into this position of a maid. But she was always a gentlewoman. And in this one, we see Effie, and she is not a good and kind and perfect person. And she is not already a lady. She is angry. She is angry at the situation and the people around her who treat her like crap. And yes, she is good and kind a lot of the time, but sometimes she's just angry. And I really enjoyed that. And I do think this is my favorite book in the series. Just the dynamic between the 2 of them, absolutely great. And so then I read The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie, and I honestly cannot tell you much about this book. It is the 3rd and final book in the First Law trilogy, and it follows, honestly, I don't know what the plot of it is, because by the end of the 3rd book, I still don't think that there is actually a plot. Like, there's a war coming, a war happens. Yeah, that's what happens. it was just so unsatisfying. And I was watching the catch-up book club live show for it, and they were like, I think that's meant to be the point, that it's supposed to be like kind of hopeless, and that yes, we're following these three characters, but they're not actually the main characters, really. And I'm like, then why am I following them? Maybe I can see what he was trying to do, but it just didn't work for me. I just ended up so bored, and I liked the first book. I gave it a 4 stars. The series just went down. It went 4-3-2, and just by this, I was like, so I wouldn't have finished it apart from the fact that like I literally had nothing else to read. So I literally just like powered through the last like half of this book in a day and just finished it. Then book number 5 that I read in the month was The Tropic of Servants by Marie Brennan. This is book 2, The Memoirs of Lady Trent. And I liked this more than book 1. So this series, it follows Isabella Trent, and she is an old lady, and she has decided to write down her memoirs telling the stories of all of the adventures she's been on, because she is like one of the most famous naturalists in the world, and she obviously is famous for her study of dragons. And I didn't necessarily love the characters or the plot of the first book, but I thought the writing style was absolutely incredible, and it really brought something different to it. And so I read that, and I really enjoyed it. Then I continued on and I read this one. It was just slightly better paced than the first one for me. I enjoyed getting more exploration of different cultures, because I feel like in the first one, despite the fact we are set in a fictional world, it still very much resembles like Regency era kind of England. In this one, we finally like get to see them go elsewhere in the world, like really far out, and really learn completely different parts of the culture. I really enjoyed that part of the book, and I do think, as I said, it was better paced. We get her going to multiple different places, learning all of the things about that. And I think I still didn't love Isabella as a character, but I thought there was some discussions around this book. Later in the book, she is kind of expressing some of her darkest secrets and thoughts, and how she knows that everyone would see her as a bad woman, as a bad mother, as a bad wife, as just a bad person, because she isn't a typical woman. And I thought that conversation was so excellently done, and I just really loved that part of the book. As Long Shadow, which is the third and I think final book in the Regency era fairy tales. So we follow Abigail, and she is learning magic, and there is a young woman dying in London, and she decides that she is going to figure out what is happening. And she ends up coming across a young magician called Mercy. And Mercy has a knack for seeing ghosts and for some magic, but she is also quite mysterious, and it follows the two of them. It is a sapphic romance, and we follow the two of them as they try to figure out this mystery of what is happening to these girls. This was my least favorite, which I was really sad about, because when I heard that it was sapphic, I was really excited. I still liked the characters, but I just didn't connect to them as much as I did with some of the other ones, and it was a bit disappointing because I was like so excited. But I still enjoyed it, and it was still a decent 4 star. Okay, so then book number 7 was Her Majesty's World Coven. This is another one I cannot tell you anything about, because again, I give it a 2 stars, and again, I cannot remember a single thing about this book, despite the fact I only read it a while ago. So I do think this was kind of like, I was starting to feel a bit slumpy, so that might kind of contribute to it, because I feel bad giving it a 2 stars, because I'm like, I feel like most other times it probably would have been a 3 stars, but my like attention span was not there. And I'm not gonna lie, I listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by Nicola Coughlan, who I think a lot of people know her as a Penelope from Bridgerton. I don't watch Bridgerton, but I know her as Claire from Dairy Girls, and I love Dairy Girls. So literally every time I went to read this book, all I kept thinking was, I really want to watch Dairy Girls. And that is all I would think all the time while the audiobook was playing. And that is not her, like, she was a really good narrator. She did a lot of accents, and she seemed to do a pretty good job of it, but I just wanted to watch Dairy Girls, and I haven't watched it yet. I really want to rewatch it. So the book just didn't really work for me. I would actually still be intrigued to try future Juno Dawson fantasy books, because I think she mostly writes YA contemporary, I believe, plus a bit of nonfiction. And I think there was a lot of conversations in here that like carry over well from the YA contemporary genre, especially about like being trans. I thought that the conversations were so well done and so important, especially in fantasy. We don't have a lot of kind of like real, like we have real world discussions, but not necessarily about things from like day to day. Because like we'll have like big discussions on like morality and like war and things like this, but a lot of this is about like LGBTQ and all of those kind of things, because it's like, well, if a character, you know, if we can do this sort of spell, why can't a character be like, why can't a person be trans? Like, and I think that those are really important conversations to have in an adult fantasy book. But the characters just didn't really vibe with me. The plot just didn't keep me interested. And so like, I feel bad giving it such a low rating because I do think this is an important book, but it just didn't work for me. So then I started reading romance books. I actually want to do a video where I talk about all of the romance books I ever read, which is not many. Like it's maybe 20 combined. And then get more recommendations because I'm trying. But I read 3 in a row. And then I started being like, yeah, I think I'm done. The first one I read was Forget Me Not by Julie Soto, I think. I think I've realized that if I'm reading a romance book, I have to read it in a day. Like there is no like 2 days. Like you gotta binge that in a day, because Forget Me Not, I like the first day I was like obsessed. I was like, oh my god, I'm like, you know, I was like grinning ear to ear. I was having such a good time. And then the second day, just not the same. Is it because like it's just not as well written? Is it because like the conflict is in the second half and I don't like that? Or is it because or is it just like a me problem and like the buzz has kind of like died down? I think it might be a mix of all of them. We follow a wedding planner and we follow a wedding that she is planning, and it is about an influencer and they already know who they want for their flowers. Unfortunately, this happens to be her ex-boyfriend, and it is kind of them getting back together, but we get dual timeline. So we get her point of view in the present, which is honestly mostly the wedding planning and like a bit of tension between her and him. And then we get his point of view, which his point of view is like 5 years ago when they were together. And so we're kind of nearly getting 2 romances, because we were getting the one in the present, which I will say really doesn't happen until the very end. And then we're getting the one in the past, which we're getting like the romance, but we're building up to the breakup. I think I needed them to get together in like the now timeline way quicker, because it was literally like 15 minutes before the end. And that's just like, that's too little. And I think, I don't know, I feel like a lot of the problems in this book could have been solved if our main character just went to therapy. Also, there was a thing that happened in this book and the next book that I'm going to talk about, which it is like, I'm not sure if it's a spoiler or not. Like it kind of is, because like it happens, it's revealed at the end of the book, but it gave me major ick, and it happened to in the 2 of them, like 2 of them. And it's not cute, it's not hot, no. And so then the next book that I read was A 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. And this one, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And I was actually, it would have been a lot higher 4 stars, except the ick thing happened again. And so then it was like a middle of the range 4 star. And I read The Dead Romantics last year by Ashley Poston. And I will say, I think I prefer the premise of The Dead Romantics, but I think her writing has improved a lot. And like her kind of pacing has improved a lot in The 7-Year Slip. And so I overall prefer this book, but I think the premise of the first one is so much better. But this one, it follows Clementine? I feel like her name is something weird like that. And she has inherited an apartment from her aunt. And when growing up, her aunt used to tell her stories that it was a magical apartment, and one day you would step in and you would be 7 years in the past. And then one day she heads home from work and she walks in, and then she falls asleep on her couch, and then she is woken up by a strange man, and she soon discovers she is 7 years in the past. And we, again, kind of actually similar to Forget Me Not, again we're kind of getting 2 timelines. So we're getting her in the past, and then we get her in the present, and again we're kind of following her job, and a lot less romance focused in the like present timeline, but she does come across this guy again. And obviously it's been 7 years for him. He has changed a lot, but he was like this way 7 years ago and he's so changed now. And like, obviously people change in 7 years, but I really, really enjoyed it. Like, he is so like enthusiastic and happy. I loved seeing her growth because she's going through a lot, and I think she's putting a lot of it onto him in the present timeline. And then in the past, she's just like so, you know, in this bubble. And then in the present timeline, she's not. And I really enjoyed some of the explorations of this one. Both of her books actually deal pretty heavily with grief. So if that's not something you're able to read, you should avoid these for now. And then last, but certainly not least, I read Beach Read by Emily Henry. And I also gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Not as high a 4-star, I don't think. And this is going to sound weird, but I actually kind of appreciated the fact that the male main character kind of, like, he has stuff going on. Because I feel like a lot of the time, which, hey, maybe it is more realistic that terrible things happen more often to women, but I feel like a lot of time in romance, I haven't read that many, but I feel like I see it quite a bit, where like the woman, she'll have so much going on, you know, like her mother will be just after dying, and she'll also be after losing her job, and she also like has had a terrible, like, there's just so many things that have happened, and like sometimes like really terrible things have happened and sometimes not so terrible, you know, there's like a scale, but like I feel like there's always just like so many things on like the female character, and then the male character is like, you know, I don't know, it's always like something like kind of like compared to like everything that the woman is going through is like kind of stupid. It's like, oh, you know, I lost my favorite baseball glove. That was such a weird example. I've never read a book where that happens, but like, it's like, that's your problem? That's your problem? But whereas in this one, I felt like both of them, they really had a lot going on. And I think that they were both very mature with each other. Like this, so we follow a main character, and I kind of don't remember her name. And she has lost her father recently. And he left his beach house. And this was the beach house that he shared with his mistress, and this has basically ruined her perception of what romance is, because she always looked up to her parents as what true love is, and she writes romance books, and she is in a bit of a writer's slump. So she has a neighbor, and she does not like this neighbor, and then she realizes that this neighbor is her rival from college. But basically it was never a rivalry, because like he didn't even know that she was in a rivalry with him. Which I gotta say, I do love that trope when it's like woman is like convinced that they are like arch enemies and man is just like oblivious. I do find it funny. Basically both of them are very unsure if love is even a thing and if it lasts and things like that, and both of them are both struggling with their writing because of all of the things that are happening, and they decide to swap genres. And I really enjoy this, and as I said, I think the two characters, they spoke maturely to each other most of the time. There was like, yes, there was a third act conflict, and yes, it was a little bit miscommunication, but it wasn't that much, because a lot of it was based on stuff that he had actually said before, and it wasn't necessarily miscommunication. It was just he needed some time to think about it, and she got worried that he had to think about it. So those were all of the books that I read in June and July. So thank you guys so much for watching. I do enjoy it. If you did, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.